It's wonderful to be able to present Simon Reeve in conversation with Paul Blezard, talking about his best-selling memoir, Step by Step, as part of the Stanfords Travel Writers Festival. Now, many of you will be enjoying Simon's new series, Incredible Journeys, on the BBC right now. Simon's travels have taken him across jungles, deserts, mountains and oceans, and also to some of the most beautiful, dangerous and remote regions of the world. You'll hear the stories behind some of the expeditions, and they will touch on the current pandemic and the effects lockdown have had on travel and mental health. Please enjoy Simon Reeve in conversation with Paul Blezard.
Hello, everybody, and a very warm welcome to this, the online Stanfords Travel Writers Festival 2021. Not from the hallowed portals of London's Olympia this time, but through the medium of Tinternet, as my dad still insists on calling it. Ask the internet. I'm delighted to be able to introduce to you today an old friend of mine and also of all of ours, one of the hardest working and nicest men in both books and broadcasting, whose rather impressive work ethic has resulted in no fewer than 25 excellent TV shows, I'm not going to list them, and 4 damn fine books. Simon Reeve, I'm sorry we're not on a stage in Olympia as part of the Destinations show, but where I'm stuck in rural Warwickshire, shielding an 81-year-old dad. Whereabouts do we find you and how are you?
Hello, Paul. I am in deepest, darkest Devon. I'm on Dartmoor. We live in Dartmoor National Park. I'm just thinking, actually, deepest and darkest is a bit of a cliche. It's not entirely true. Living and being in rural Warwickshire or rural Dartmoor during this madness has been a bit of a blessing in many a way. I'm all right, thank you for asking. We've just started the homeschooling of a very energetic, sociable 9-year-old, which is slightly tricky and probably the trickiest thing that has ever happened here. But apart from that, we're pretty much all right, thank you.
I note that your book, Step by Step, that we're here to talk about is dedicated to Jake. I have a question regarding this. I know, and as I've said in my very brief intro, I know just how much of yourself and your time you put into the TV shows that we love watching and the books that result, or the books that you do separate from. How are you juggling the requirements of a family life with a professional working wife and with a small child and with being away from home so long to record these shows? How does that work?
Well, it's like this, Paul. I've got these balls and I chuck them up in the air and then I have to try and stop any of them falling on the ground. I think it's the same for loads of people, isn't it, really? And I'm very lucky in that I suppose somebody doesn't come threatening me immediately with a P45 if I decide that, oh, I need to spend a bit of an hour longer playing football with my lad and helping him with his homework. So it's a very privileged position to be in. There is a slight life challenge, of course, in normally prior to the pandemic, juggling the international travel, the gadding around the world, as some of my friends call it, with home life. But I think we handle it pretty well. I'm never away for ludicrous periods of time. I used to do quite long stints on shoots abroad, 6 weeks, 7 weeks, and now we've well, when we were able to travel and film, we reduced it down to make it more manageable, and so that my son wouldn't be asking who's that strange man when I came home.
It's admirable that you found a way to sort out. I know it's an issue that lots of broadcasters have, especially for sort of foreign correspondents and people such as yourself. Can we start with the beginnings of Simon Reeve? Can you give us a picture of the young Simon Reeve? And then we'll work out that fantastic thing that I love in so many successful or admirable people's lives, when they reach a T-junction and they take the right turning. But what was Simon Reeve like as a 12, 14, 16-year-old?
Oh, at 12, he was a naughty little boy. Or a naughty young man, actually. It's so easy to think of a 12-year-old as still being a child, but in many ways they're on the cusp of adulthood. And I've been held up around the world twice, I think, by kids of that age holding Kalashnikovs. So, you know, a 12-year-old is still a powerful thing. He was a naughty lad, and he was starting to take the wrong turn in life, and it could have gone badly wrong. By 14 and 16, he was pretty pathetic. He was quite lost, didn't know what was happening in his life, didn't know what was happening in the world, didn't know where he was going, had no direction. 16 was a really bad age for me, really, really tricky. I was spiraling down, I suppose, into depression and quite serious mental health problems. I was really hopeless at school. Nothing seemed to be going my way. I couldn't get a girlfriend. I was really struggling, and I bounced along at rock bottom, really, and eventually flunked out of school without any real qualifications. And just beyond 16, found myself on the dole, going nowhere, thinking that life had no possibilities for me, and genuinely not knowing whether I was going to make it to 20, quite frankly. I was in a very dark and troubled place.
You then got a gig. You did a number of jobs. You worked at a supermarket, jewelry shop, charity shop, and so on. But then you started researching and writing in your spare time whilst you got a job as a postboy, if memory serves, at the Sunday. Was it the Sunday Times or the Observer? I forget now.
It was the Sunday Times, and yes, that is absolutely the case. It's many years compressed down into a couple of sentences, but of course, and when you say it, what a jewelry shop, and I'm at this end thinking, oh yeah, there was H. Samuel, Oxford Circus. I was very proud of that job. I lasted there nearly one whole day, and then I was sacked for taking the keys to the safe. That was very Muppety, and but I was trying. I was really struggling. I really was, and I really feel for the younger me who had a very tough time, and I feel desperately sorry and angry as well, actually, about how we waste the potential of other lost young people who don't have a clear path in life from school to college or school to a job or university. I think we're very bad as a nation at harnessing the abilities of those youngsters and giving them a bit of purpose and meaning and direction. And in fact, the best bit of direction I got was from the lady who eventually gave me the title of the book you've mentioned, Step by Step. I was in the job centre. I was signing on for the dole. I had just literally stepped back from the brink on the edge of a bridge and decided I was going to try and live a life. And she gave me some brilliant advice. I said to her, I didn't know what to do with my life. Everyone's told, have a 5-year plan, have a 10-year plan. I said, I can't get out of bed in the morning. And she said, just take things really slowly, do anything, do things step by step. And it was such critical advice for me then. And I think it's quite useful as well, even for me during the pandemic, when I've started to get quite, like many people, depressed about the situation. Just the sheer act of doing something, of moving in any direction, doing anything, but walking fundamentally is such a powerful means of helping our minds. And so I started taking little baby steps, and I started applying for some jobs, and I failed over and over again, but I got up and I picked myself up and I carried on. And eventually, as you say, I got a job working as a postboy on the Sunday Times newspaper, for goodness sake. Literally going in there 6 o'clock in the morning. I'd have to get there and I'd have to sort maybe 20 sacks of mail. I was terrified when I started. I remember my mum had to come with me on the tube for the first few days just to make sure I made it there. I was such a bundle of nerves, and I didn't know anybody in the media. It wasn't my fan connections that got me the job or anything like that. It was a completely different world, and I was thrown into a deep lake, I suppose, in many a way. And I was really stunned that within a couple of weeks I was able to swim. I started to flourish and I suppose thrive there.
I'm going to do something very rarely do. I just want to backtrack a second, Simon. We're all having, trouble trying to keep our chins up, trying to keep our heads above water during this pandemic. All of us, for myriad reasons. And I'm very admiring of Bryony Gordon, who is a writer and a journalist and a columnist, who's been very open and honest about mental health. Normally, I would ask you, what advice would you give a 12, 14, 6-year-old who's in a similar situation? But I'm going to flip it on its head. What advice would you give to someone that knows of someone in that position about how they can help and how it's appropriate to do so? How did the woman in the dole office who said just step by step helps, how would we convert that today if we happen to know someone who's in their, who are going through adolescence or just having a really hard time in their teens and is directionless? What counsel, knowing what you know about you, if it's appropriate, what counsel would you give someone that they can give to somebody else?
I think, yeah, I mean, I am reluctant to give advice to anybody, particularly anybody who's trying to help somebody who's in a difficult mental health situation, because I think it suggests that they can help, and I think it is worth just gently pointing out that it's not always possible. That in my case, I had love around me when I was a youngster, but I wasn't listening to it. I think there are times I do when people have to bounce along the bottom before they can realize where they are and where they realize they can stand up and stand on their own 2 feet. I think there are times like that. Having said that, because I've been through it, and I see other, obviously I've got friends and family who've had struggles in life as well, and I've met lots of people on my journeys and my travels around the world, who've also encountered similar situations. I would humbly, gently suggest, keep loving, keep caring. Don't take all the responsibility yourself, because individuals have to take responsibilities for themselves ultimately, or they will never find their own true path. But definitely keep loving, keep caring. I would say keep making suggestions carefully, gently, not shaking by the shoulders, but almost more like more like in a restaurant, somebody being shown a menu. Just, there's these possibilities. Look, you could try these things if you wanted to. I would say if they're old enough, if it's appropriate, I do really believe in the restorative power of just the sheer act of walking. I think it's a much underrated action. The simple physical mental act of putting one foot in front of the other and moving in a direction, any direction. So if you can get somebody to get up and get out and go for a walk, then you have done a wonderful and beautiful thing. If that person is normally staying at home and locked in a room. And of course, I think, we have no idea what the world is going to be like, and what we as humans are going to be like coming out of this pandemic, which we eventually will. We will come out of this, but what will be the consequences for people who have been told and forced to stay inside for so long? I think we're going to need to be reminded of the importance of getting out, and we're going to be needed to be encouraged to step outside and to take a walk and have a tiny local adventure that hopefully that will then lead to bigger ones. So I think that's the sort of the humble advice I would offer. But I think it's for people and for countries. You cannot, horse to water, etc. You cannot always force somebody to snap out of it. It doesn't work like that. People have to find that realization themselves often, but we can help.
It's a process, not a switch. Sound advice. Right, let's come straight back to you. So you're in the post room at the Sunday Times. What happens next? What's this great sort of epiphany or fulcrum upon which everything that's happened to you since was catalyzed?
I think the epiphany, as it were, or the T junction, as you were describing earlier, I suppose in a way it was applying for that job in the first place, and saying yes, okay, I'll go for this, even though it was completely out of my league. I remember the feeling, actually, because although my dad didn't get me the job, he showed me the advert. In fact, it gets me now just thinking about it. He showed me the advert in the paper, a little bit like I've just said, the waiter in the restaurant showing me the menu. He really did. I've never thought of it like that. I've never used that analogy for it, but my goodness, it was exactly like that. He just sort of put it in front of me, showed it to me. Well, what about this? He said, look at that. And it said, people to work in the post room, but with a possibility perhaps maybe of some of some training if you worked hard. And I could have said no. I could have said, you must be joking. I haven't got a chance of doing that. It's a flipping media job. I don't know anyone in the media, but I did go for it. And for all my hopelessness, I tried. And I think that I'm very proud of myself for that moment, for that little turning point, as much as anything, because there was a lot of risk in that, and I'd been knocked back from so many jobs by that point. I'd been turned down, literally. I went for a job as a white van driver, and on Wembley Stadium trading estate, and the guy rejected me from the job. In front of me, he said, "You're the only person who's applied, but I'm still not going to give you the job," and dangled the keys in front of me, the swine. So I'd been really knocked back again and again, and I still went for that job at the Sunday Times. I still tried. And I'm very proud of myself for that. And very quickly, opportunities started coming my way. I'd said yes in a big way by applying for the job. I'd been for an interview. I'd held it together for that, even though I was terrified. I remember I used to be sick in the morning. I was sick before I went for the interview. I was sick before the first few days when I started work. I went in shaking on an empty stomach, and I still did it. And I still tried. So I'm very proud of myself for that. And then people started asking me to help on things. They started asking me to go and get them a prawn sandwich. They started saying, "Can you photocopy these things for me?" And I kept saying yes. And I think because I was a very blank slate, I hadn't been to university. I hadn't spent 5 years studying for some impossible degree. I hadn't been to a privileged school. I didn't have that baggage, quite frankly. I was starting from nothing, and I was grateful for anything. So I was willing to graft like that. I would have cleaned the loos happily if they'd wanted me to, and I was mates with the guy who did. And that was my level, and I was really happy with that. But then I started saying, yes, I'll do this job and I'll give this a try. And goodness, this is a long answer, I'm sorry, but you did ask. And then I got my I suppose my big break, and it was slightly ridiculous, but if you want, I might even tell you about it.
Please do, Simon. Please do.
I'm pretty sure I would put it in the book, because it's not a bad tale. But I was, goodness, I was sorting the post, and I still go into this sort of muscle memory of chucking it into the pigeonholes whenever I say that. Sorting the post, I was pretty fast at it, I'll tell you. And one of the senior people that was there, and he came up to me, and he said, "Simon, I know you've been doing some research for people here, haven't you?" I said, yes, I have. I've been photocopying some things. He said, "I need you to go on a big mission. Are you up for it?" And I said, "Well, yes, I am, yes." He said, "Okay, I need you to go to Boston to find 2 South African neo-Nazi terrorists who are on the run." I was like, what? And I was completely blown sideways. He said, "I've got to go into a meeting. I'll come back in half an hour and I'll brief you. Just get ready." And I was completely, I didn't know what to do. And I remember I went into the newsroom, and I went to see the girls on the news desk, and I said to them, "He wanted me to go to Boston, for goodness sake. I don't have a passport. What am I going to do? What am I going to say?" And I went into the investigations department, and I said to the guy there, "He wants me to go to Boston. I've never been on a plane. This is way out of my league. What am I going to do?" And I went to see another guy, and I said, "I've never been on a plane. I haven't got a passport. What do I do? What do I say?" He said, "Calm down, Simon. It's Boston in Lincolnshire." Of course it is Boston in Lincolnshire. I didn't even know there was a Boston in Lincolnshire, for goodness sake, growing up in edge of inner city London. But so I had this big break. I had to go and find these 2 South African neo-Nazi terrorists who were on the run. And I was a kid. I was 18, but I was so young, and I had my little leather jacket from Shepherd's Bush Market and my tie from Macro. And I remember I got some petty cash, and I went to King's Cross, and they'd give me a phone number where they thought these guys. We had 4 or 5 numbers and addresses where they might be, and they were going to send people to each of these addresses to find them. Oh my goodness. And nobody was answering the phone at this number, and I rang it from King's Cross. I thought I'll use my initiative, and somebody answered at the other end, but they didn't say anything. And so I had to say, "Hello, this is Simon Reeve from the Sunday Times newspaper. London, which really helped, I remember. And they agreed to meet me. And I met up with them in Boston, and they were two pathetic, terrible terrorists who had done unspeakable things. And even I, as a kid, could see that they were pathetic. And I brought them back down to London, and proper grown-up investigators talked to them there. And I went back to sorting the post. But that was really my big break. It proved that I could handle a mission. And very soon after that, I mean, this was within, I suppose, 6 months of starting work as a postboy. I was working on proper investigations. I was working often undercover. I was working on investigations into arms dealing, into nuclear smuggling, into really hardcore, exciting, boys-only sort of investigations. I had a walkie-talkie. I was on surveillance missions. It was totally beyond what I could have imagined I would be capable of doing just a year before. But that, I think it's the power of opportunity. It's giving youngsters, young men particularly, who have a terrible problem with mental health, a mental health epidemic at the moment. I think it's giving them direction and purpose and meaning and a chance. And I took mine.
There's a bin Laden connection. Remind us of the bin Laden connection in one of your investigations, which happened way before the appalling events of September the 11th, 2001.
So, yeah, 1993, there was an attack on the World Trade Center in New York, February 1993. And it was a huge terrorist attack at the time. It caused more casualties than any event in American domestic history since the Civil War. It was an almost unique type of explosive that was used, and it nearly cut through the support columns and nearly toppled the towers. And I started investigating that the same day that it happened, just from London, just going through the news reports and talking to contacts I had in the intelligence world. I don't think I was 20 years old, for goodness sake. Incredible. And I was already working on really serious investigations like that, and I started investigating it, and I kept going long after the newspaper had lost interest. And gradually, over a few months, I realized there was a much bigger story behind that attack. And I had this mad idea that I could write a book about the attack and the plot behind it and the investigation and aftermath. And I think it's quite extraordinary now, but an agent agreed to take me on, and a publisher agreed to publish a book about it. And I started work on it, and I spent 5 years researching a book that evolved to become the first book in the world on Osama bin Laden and Al-Qaeda. And it feels like a very different life now. I was obviously much younger and a bit more gung-ho about investigating the most dangerous terrorists in the world, but I found it utterly fascinating and horrific. And I found that people would talk to me about it, and I still can't entirely understand it now. I was so young, but I would just ring up the FBI press office and I'd say, can I talk to somebody from the investigation team? And Americans are very open, so they'd say, okay. And they'd let me talk to somebody, and I'd talk to them, and then I'd say, is there anyone else? And they'd say, oh, you should speak to Mark. He's the leader of the Joint Terrorist Task Force. I'll see if he'll talk to you. And he would talk to me as well, and then he'd put me on to somebody else. And I found myself being able to track down and talk to people from a whole secret world of militants and FBI agents, but spies as well, Pakistani spies who would give me these awful interrogation reports and recordings and documents. It was absolutely bizarre, but I spent years on it, and it was completely my life.
And it really, really launched you. You talk about the dangers of such things, and such things do come out. I mean, you and I have both been faced by, as you say, drunk. There's nothing more frightening, I think, than a drunken 12-year-old wearing a pair of flip-flops, crappy army fatigues, and carrying an AK-47. I think that's my vision of hell, and I still get nightmares about it. But can you bring us to 2006 now? You're filming Equator and you're in Gabon. Talk us about the dangers of that.
Well, yes, that was very unfortunate. We were filming my first big, I suppose, TV series called Equator, which was a bit of does what it says on the tin television. I was traveling all the way around the equator, as you do. And it was my first big telly project, in that the series I'd made before then were sort of late night, relatively low budget programs. And Equator was bigger and glossier, and we had a proper camera person for the first time. And slightly unfortunately, I had muppetly failed to take my all my tablets and pills, and we were trekking through the jungles of Gabon, and we were in an area where they'd had an outbreak of Ebola. And then a couple of nights later, I woke up in the middle of the night with a raging temperature, just a fraction off brain damage, and I was vomiting blood into my bath, and I thought I had Ebola, and I thought I was going to die, and I was incredibly ill and feverishly hallucinating, and it was absolutely awful. But eventually, when I got some treatment, my colleagues basically saved my life and found some doctors, and when the doctor said you've got malaria, I was actually quite relieved, to be honest, because I thought that's not as bad as eyeball bleeding Ebola, for goodness sake. But I was still very sick. I was properly ill. However, I was a Western telly presenter in Gabon, and we were able to get me some really good treatment from some unlicensed but slightly magical drugs. And war broke out inside my body when I took the drugs, because it encourages the malarial parasites to launch their attack early. But thank goodness my body was able to overcome. I was ill for a while. I've never entirely felt the same since, but I survived my brush with malaria. Not so much of a brush, more of a swamping, I would say.
Yeah. Do you ever get flashbacks to it? I mean, because malaria can come back and bite you in the bum. Do you ever have that or not?
It can do. I don't know if I have had. I mean, I would honestly say I've never felt the same since, but I've never felt anything remotely as bad as that. But I have had some periods of sort of strange fatigue that I've thought might be connected to it, but I've never had the sort of proper feverish outbreak. I've been very lucky, to be honest, and I do think it's worth pointing out. Obviously we focus on the drama and excitement of travel, and telly presenters like me love talking about the dangers of the big wide world. But I do think fundamentally, not current period notwithstanding, it is an incredibly safe planet out there for global travel. Oh my goodness, this was the massive surprise for me when I first started traveling extensively. I was amazed how warm and how welcoming people were wherever I was, whatever I was doing, whether we had the cameras rolling and running or not. It is a welcoming world, and when this pandemic bonkers nightmare is over, we will get back out there again. People should have no doubt about that.
Exactly. It's always astonished me that you can go to, we are just 6 hour, 6 hour plane ride from some of the worst parts in the world, if you listen to the news, but you can fly, as I have done, to something that's meant to be in the middle of a war, find that the airport's functioning normally, you can go to a cafe, have a coffee, you meet some people on the street, who you've never met before, they take you to their house, and while there may be rocket-propelled grenades half a mile away, you could be sitting in their garden having the most fantastic tea party and the most exceptional sort of humane hospitality it's possible. Right, you've been called TV's most interesting globetrotter, the craziest or bravest man on TV, but I like the Telegraph, which says that like all the best travellers, Reeve carries out his investigations with infectious relish and in the realisation that trying to understand the country you're in is not just fascinating, it's hugely enjoyable. The Sun's also called you perhaps the best tour guide in the world. But I like what you do for your writing, because your writing, you come across in your writing exactly as I know you to be and exactly as we see you on the screen. And we cannot get a cigarette paper between your public persona as we see on the small screen and the real Simon Reeve. And what I'd love you to do, if you wouldn't mind, Simon, is would you mind reading us a short extract from Step by Step so that people can get an indication of how you write?
Just to reassure everybody, all right, I'm just as much of a nightmare nutbag as everybody else, and you can definitely get a cigarette paper between me and the public persona, which is obviously slightly more curated and edited. And I'm sure if you spoke to my family and friends, they would laugh themselves sideways at what you've said. But all right, let's stick with the myth. I'm such a lovely chap. I'm going to read to you, and I've got my book here. You didn't give me a huge amount of warning about this, so I was very lucky that when I picked the bit that I picked the bit slightly randomly that I want to read, but I think it was almost fate that I opened it on that page, and I'm delighted to read it to you. It's a bit that matters to me a huge amount. So this is taken from my little book. It's called Step by Step. It's not pretentious at all. The life in my journey is definitely not pompous in any way. And this is a bit where I'm talking about what really matters to me, I suppose, about my travels and a journey, and what I love most about the journeys from the very beginning, really. And remembering that I came to travel relatively late in a modern sense. You know, I didn't get on a plane until I was an adult. I wasn't going on adventurous holidays and journeys when I was a youngster. We didn't do anything like that. We just went to Dorset for our summer holidays, and wonderful that was. But when I first started traveling for TV and as an adult and having proper adventures, what really stood out were the people. And I'm going to read to you from page 187. For me, the strongest memories from that first trip. So this is when I first started making teleprograms and I started traveling in Central Asia for a series called Meet the Stands. For me, the strongest memories from that first trip and from every trip since are my encounters with us, with our inspiring, intriguing, long-suffering, comic, clever, and caring fellow humans. When we plan a journey, I am always asking and thinking, who are we going to meet? Meaningful encounters with other people in a strange part of the world are the real experiences to treasure. If I'm not meeting people, then I'm not on a proper journey. In Central Asia, I was lucky to spend time with locals who were warm, generous, and fascinating. And in the years since, I've been blessed to meet folk who have been completely inspirational. Traveling in Kenya more recently, I crossed the great African plains and arrived at a remote Maasai homestead and the mud dung hut of a grandmother called Lucy. She was renovating and refreshing the hut, and I was press ganged into slapping huge cow pats on the sides while Lucy giggled and watched and giggled even so wildly she had to have a sit down and a cup of tea. I loved spending a day with Lucy, not because of her mud hut or her traditional Maasai clothing complete with colourful shawl, bead jewellery and stretched earlobes. Lucy was a proud cattle herder, but her mind roamed so much further than the plains where she lived. As we walked and chatted, Lucy bombarded me with questions about my travels, the world, our cameras, and my life. We were walking together on a vast plain, almost completely empty of humanity, keeping an eye on Lucy's herd of cattle. I was struggling to get a word in edgeways, and then a phone rang. Lucy looked sheepish, then reached into her robes and retrieved a battered mobile. It turned out she would send a youngster 15 miles to charge the phone each week, proving old Nokias really hold their power. On the other end of the line was her neighbour, standing outside her own hut half a mile away, squinting against the sun and wondering who on earth were those tall foreigners and where was Lucy taking them in the midday heat. Life for Lucy's family was changing. She just sold a cow to pay for her granddaughter to go to college 200 miles away, to study travel and tourism. Perhaps one day, someone reading this will stay in her hotel. Well, the next bit is very long, so I think we'll stop that there. But it's really about what matters most to me on my journeys, as I say, and that is the people I meet and the realization I have had that somebody like Lucy, gifted and given different life opportunities, if she'd been born in a different color, in a different country, and perhaps with a different color, she could have been anything, anywhere. She was so much brighter and sharper than me. And meeting her and people like her is such a constant reminder to me of the privileges I have had, the opportunities I have had growing up in this country with the education system, the welfare state, the NHS. We take it for granted at our absolute peril, even during this pandemic, with all the suffering and isolation we have experienced. We are still the luckiest human beings who have ever lived. We have to remember that. We will get through this period. We will come out the other side. We need to be reminded of how lucky we are, how fortunate, how blessed we are. Travel has helped me, I think, to understand that, and I think it can help a lot of people as well.
I think it's extremely well put, Simon. Can we lift the veil slightly? We don't have that much time left, but I'd like to do two things. One of them, before we close, one of which is, can we lift the veil slightly on what goes on behind the camera? Because it's easy to imagine that you have an enormous team behind you with huge amounts of kit on whatever documentary it is that you're making, whether you're going around the equator or around the Caribbean or through Central America or wherever. Just tell us, how does day-to-day filming occur?
Well, there's generally four of us from the UK who head out to somewhere, including me, and that includes a camera person. That's usually, in recent years, been Jonathan or Craig, who I've worked with many a time, who are absolute heroes, extraordinary operators and incredible cameramen. Then we have an assistant producer who also works their proverbials off, and filming, logistics, handling everything, thinking ahead, thinking backwards, worrying about everything. Then we've got a producer director as well who does all of the above. I just have to do this, really, and occasionally feed flapjacks to the team when they get a bit hungry. I definitely have the cushiest job in the team and get more sleep than anybody else. And I also get all the credit, which seems very unfair, although doubtless I'd get hung, drawn and quartered if it went horribly wrong. But so there's just four of us generally who travel out. We might have a couple of local people with us as well. We try and keep as light a footprint as possible. There are times when it will be just me and perhaps one other person filming because we're in a physically tight space, or we've been sort of projected forward from into a tricky or dangerous place. That has happened a good few times. And then we'll have been doing some research for weeks intensively and months on and off beforehand, working out roughly what we could do and where we might be able to go. But we don't have a script. I'm not following orders, if you like. We don't have a recce where somebody goes out ahead of you and works out exactly what's going to happen. We have to sort of make it up on the spot, and that makes it much more of a genuine adventure and experience, I would like to claim. But yeah, I've got a small-ish team with me. We'll have maybe 150, 200 kilograms of kit with us as well, which needs to be lugged around. So we're not moving fleet of foot, but we're also not a great caravan of people like you hear about some sort of Victorian explorer taking a grand piano. We are stripped down, I think, as much as we can. We don't have somebody separate doing the sound recording, for example. So the Jonathan or Craig, the cameraman, they'll do that as well. So they've got to juggle multiple things. And there have been occasions where I remember there was a moment where Jonathan was trying to film with one hand while operate a drone, filming with the drone at the same time. Now that is the sort of multitasking that only an elite camera person can manage. That was very impressive.
Well done, Jonathan. Obviously, we're locked down. Nobody's traveling anywhere. The travel business has been eviscerated. Countries who rely upon tourism are having a terrible time all around the world. Once we've all been vaccinated, hopefully, and once we can start to travel again and get on an aircraft, two questions, Simon. Where are you dying to go to? Not necessarily for journalism or for reportage, but for yourself. And two, what can we learn about this time in order that we travel responsibly? Let us not forget, in the midst of all that's happening in America and all that's happening with the global pandemic, we also have a global warming crisis.
Yeah, you are massively, massively right. Yeah, I think, I studied terrorism for a long time, and I studied other mega threats like that, nuclear terrorism, biological warfare as well, and investigated them. Nothing comes close to the emergency we are facing with human created climate change. Absolutely. And we must acknowledge, address that. Absolutely. I think travel gets a slightly bad rap, or slightly too much of a focus when it comes to climate change, because I think travel, although of course it has a huge impact on the planet, so does every other aspect of our lives in industry. Fashion, for example, I think gets off very lightly when it comes to taking the blame for climate change. And I think travel delivers so many positive, wonderful benefits as well, not just the sheer luxuriating joy of a holiday, but, as you say, to tens and hundreds of millions of people around the world whose incomes in poorer countries depend, their entire way of life and livelihoods depends on travel and tourism. And critically, I would point out as well the wild and remote areas of the planet, which are almost environmental sanctuaries, almost wildlife arks, that are utterly dependent on tourism money for their survival, and which are taking an absolute hammering now. And what am I talking about? I'm talking about national parks in Africa, the great national parks. I'm talking about marine protected areas in Southeast Asia, around the Maldives or off the coast of South America, where previously people who were fishermen have become wardens, sea wardens, protecting the seas and taking tourists out to look at the treasures of the oceans, and thus helping to protect them. And without tourists going to those places, there is no economic incentive for people there to look after them. So we are seeing animals being poached in huge numbers now, and being culled in national parks around the world and being lost. And we have got to realize that by not being there, we are seeing in some areas the wild facing a serious threat and possible annihilation. So we need to get back out there. We absolutely need to travel responsibly. I know we will again. If you look at our history, we've traveled through and past previous plagues and pandemics and wars, and we will get back out there. Travel is part of us, and it's part of being human, for goodness sake. So where do I want to go? I'm going to get back to South America. I really do, professionally and personally. I started filming a telly series there, traveling down through South America last year to complete a sort of bigger telly journey where I traveled the length of the Americas from top to toe, from Alaska down to Argentina. We'd started filming in South America, in Venezuela. We made it down through the Guyana Shield into the Brazilian Amazon. We came home to plan the next legs of the journey, and then COVID really struck and we couldn't go back. And I am desperate to get back out there and carry on with that journey. But listen, travelers watching this, we will get back out there. The vaccines are coming. Whether they absolutely work or don't, we will get through this, because humans have to overcome illness and pestilence and plague and travel, because it's part of us. We will get back out there again. And in the meantime, explore locally, enjoy locally, prepare for your foreign adventures, read up, plot, plan, smell the journey, so you can get your travel taste buds working again, and dream about these places you want to go to. And how can we do it? We must travel more responsibly. I think we've got to recognize what a privilege travel is, how distraught many of us have felt having it taken away. So go bigger, go better, travel more responsibly, get more from the journeys when they restart, and they will restart.
And take your malaria tablets. That's all we've got time for. It's been such a pleasure, a real pleasure to talk to you again, Simon. Thank you so much for your time. Thank you so much for really, really generous answers. And thank you for joining us once again at the Stanfords Travel Writers Festival, this time the digital edition 2021. One last word on Simon's book. It's called Step by Step, The Life in My Journeys. And Kate Humble wrote this about it. My goodness, it is brilliant, searingly honest, warm, bursting with humanity, such brave and inspiring writing. And if that doesn't tempt you to buy it, I don't know what will. Simon, look after yourself.
And you, mate. All the best to you. Cheers, pal. Bye, everyone.
Two great people on great form there. Do click over to Stanford's virtual stand where you can buy a copy of Simon's brilliant memoir, Step by Step, and explore all the other wonderful things they have going on. Join us after the break for our next session, the Travel Advice Clinic with Wanderlust.
For 7 years now, the Stanfords Travel Writers Festival has been proud to be a part of Destinations, bringing inspirational talks from explorers, adventurers, historians, novelists, TV personalities, and many more of the very best travel authors. To delve into our treasure trove of travel books, maps, the greatest selection of globes in the world, and the rest of our 24-event festival lineup, head to stanfords.co.uk, and we'll see you right here in your very own front row for the Stanfords Travel Writers Festival 2021.